Hello and welcome back to Django Class-Based Views mini-series. So here we're having a look, or we're focusing on the Django class-based generic view, ListView. Similar to the previous tutorials in this series, we'll have a look at a use case for the ListView and then look at the inherited methods and attributes. So I'm going to give you some code examples and how you might utilize the ListView. So here's really just an example of utilizing the ListView. Obviously, we can't go through every single option, but I try to point you and guide you in the right direction for further reading. So as the name suggests, the generic ListView has been designed to present or display a list of objects. So in the previous tutorials, we utilized the template view, and we utilized that in actual fact to output multiple objects on the page. So we'll have a look at a comparison between the template view and the list view in the code. But something that makes the list view, the generic list view, stand out is that it can be paginated. So if you're not too familiar with that, you might have already gone to a web page, and at the bottom of a list, there's options to navigate to different pages of that list. So we're just breaking up a big list into multiple pages, so pagination. So where you might not use, or where you prefer potentially not to use the list view, is if, for example, you had a page with a form, or if you wanted to use or return data to be updated, or create data in the database. So that's typically where you wouldn't use the list view. So like all of these views here, it doesn't mean you can't use these generic views for that, but Django has developed these or incorporate these generic list views for specific reasons. And the answer really is that there's just better equipped generic views for these type of actions. Over the last 3 tutorials in this series, I've been showing you this graph or this grid of all the inherited views that the generic view inherits, and all the attributes then it inherits from those views. So the reason being here is I'm trying to get you engaged into the documentation. And you may notice that there's a few questions online where people ask, well, what generic view to use? Really, this is answering always your question almost, because here it tells you these are all the tools that the list view is inheriting here. And inside of these tools are attributes and methods, functions that provide the functionality that the list view then has access to. So really that goes to answer, and once you understand what the list view is inheriting, therefore you are then identifying what features, what tools are available for you to then utilize in your program, thus allowing you to select the right generic view for the right task. Hopefully so far in this tutorial series, I've started just to introduce you into this idea. I haven't really gone into any massive detail, but I hope you appreciate that this is here for something for you to explore, and we will then further touch on these ideas later in this series. Of course, eventually we will start building our own class views, so we'll need a deeper knowledge of what's happening behind the scenes here in Django, and particularly mix-ins. Right, so let's have a little look at the MRO for this list view. You can see here we have a setup, dispatch, HTTP method, not allowed. So those 3 things here we've kind of covered, I think we've touched upon in previous tutorials. I've highlighted the get query set because we're going to focus on that, just expand upon that slightly. That's going to be important here in the list view. And the reason why that is, if you think about where you're going to generate a list, of course, you might have categories in your project. So you're going to need to be able to manipulate the query so that you can return back a list of items based upon a category that's been requested. So let's not forget that all of these items here, you can just type these into the Django documentation online and read through what it is that they're doing individually. Okay, so on to the code then. So let's first of all have a look at the URL pattern for this view. You can see here there's nothing that really needs to be pointed out here. It's just a simple URL. There's nothing that you need to take in by default here. And obviously we're utilizing a name of our view or our class, book list view, and then we're using as view. So for Django class-based views, we access an appropriate view function by calling the class method as view. So that's why we use as view and then the name. So in the previous tutorial, we created this books application where we outputted utilizing the template view, these items here, and then we went into the detail view, generic detail view to output individual items. So that's where we got to, and the code base is in the download in the description. So you can follow along with this code if you want to. So this is what we have so far. We had the CBV class-based views for the first couple of tasks. And then in the previous tutorial, we created this books app. So we're going to build upon this books app. If we have a look in the view, notice that we used the template view to create a list of content on the home page. So that's what we utilized, and that's what you saw on that home page of the books app. We utilized the template view. So here we just extended the get context data, and we added a query to access all the data from the database. So you can see that other generic views are equipped to fulfill the same type of activities and tasks as the other generic views. But here we want to specifically utilize the list view. So I'm going to import this in. And as you might imagine, this is designed to create lists. And I suppose what we're trying to do here is to write as less code as possible and to obviously follow good programming principles of trying to reuse code and, where possible, never to write the same piece of code twice. So let's just start off with a comparison. So here you can see the template view and the amount of code that we need to write to output that list. So let's just get rid of this. We'll keep this, the template name, because we're going to need a template. So let's just carry on and now change this template to a list view. And what we have now in actual fact is pretty much all that we're going to need, apart from specifying the actual model that we want to use. Okay, so now we have a valid view here. All we need to really specify is the model we want to use and the template we want to display the data. And then by default, Django, or the list view behind the scenes, is basically going to select all the data from the books table in our database, and it's just going to output it all onto our home page or our home HTML page. So if I go back into the all books page where all the books should be displayed, you'll see at this point, yeah, okay, it's not working. Now, if you've looked at the previous tutorials, you can probably guess why that is. So we haven't actually specified the context object name. Now remember, by default, it's object. So let's just go into the templates and home, and let's just give you an example here. So if I can, instead of returning books, we're going to return object. So let's go back into the home page again and refresh. And you can see that it's not working. So in the previous tutorials, it was working. I think we used objects. So here we're getting a list of items. So simply the default context object name is going to be slightly different. So let's go ahead and type in object underscore list. So now let's go ahead and go into our page and refresh. And you can now see we've got our list back. Okay, so apologies if I'm just pointing out the obvious here, but you can see that we've got two lines of code in comparison to the template view where we actually had to bring in the database ourselves and put it into the context and so on. So this just really emphasizes choosing the right class-based generic view can be important for many reasons. Obviously, it slims down your code. That's obviously one thing. Obviously, this view is designed to achieve this. So therefore, behind the scenes, it has all the tools within the inherited methods and attributes the list view is inheriting here to actually fulfill this activity really easily. So let's have a look at some of the other features that this view offers. So we can, of course, we can then change the context back if we want to. That can just obviously help the code to understand what it is you're actually trying to return. So we'd return that back to objects, so to books, sorry. So let's just move that back and just test to make sure it's working. Okay, so that's just back the context. So what else can we do here? So one thing I mentioned in the ListView use case is that it provides pagination. So let's have a look at how that works. So I think not too long ago, actually, I was asked this question, how do you paginate? So utilizing this generic view is so simple. All you needed to define is, well, how many do you want to paginate by? So how many on the page do you want to view at a time? So in my database here, I think I've only got 4 items. So I'm just going to use one so you can see the full features of the pagination here. So obviously you can change this to 1 on a page, or you can show 10 at a time on a page and so on. So you can change that number. So as soon as I put that in, I can now go back to my page and it goes from 3 to 1. So that's the first thing I need to do. And obviously now I need to set up the controls so I can move between pages. So just head back into the home page here. We're just going to edit this page and just add a few different items so that we can move back and forward. So the following code that I'm going to use is just a copy and paste from the Django documentation, simply because it just has all the items that we need in a simplistic way. So let's just utilize that next. So here we go. So I've just added a new row to my home page here underneath this final div here after the N4. So a new row, and I've created a bootstrap class of col12 just to expand the whole row. And you can see here we've got this span. So like I said, this code is just from the Django documentation. It's not my code. So you can see what's happening here. We're utilizing page obj, and then we're utilizing has previous. So these are the links into the functionality of the pagination system in Django. So you can see here we have has previous. So that's going to provide us the link to go back. Here, for example, we're utilizing, so you can change this here. This is just going to show an icon so we know to go back and forward. So that's where you would change to your particular icon you want to allow users to click on to go back and forward. And you can see here we've got if. So if the page does have previous objects, it's going to show this obviously. If the page has a next object, if there's a next page, then it's obviously going to show this piece of code here. So we've just got previous and next, and you can see that there's 2 items. We can go to the first page and we can go to the last page if we want to, or we can go to the previous page or the next page. So those are the different things here. And in the middle here, we have page object number and then page object paginator number of pages. So that's just going to display what page we're on and how many pages that there are. So that's a kind of breakdown of the code there if you needed it. So let's go back to the template now, and you can see that we've got it right here. So we've got the next and previous, and we've got the last, and we've got the first. Such a simple way to include pagination into our application. So if you were to just track back all the inherited items here in the list view, if you go into the multiple object mixin, have you look at the documentation, you'll find that the paginator kind of originates from here. So if I've got my information corrected, the paginator is kind of inherited into or is imported into, included into this mix in here, which is then obviously included into the list view. So have a look if you like into the Django Core paginator. That's going to provide you some more details about the paginator, but I think generally this piece of code here, the piece of code here, that's pretty much all you need to kind of get started utilizing the pagination system and all the functionality that you might need. So let's now focus on categories. So here we've seen that we can just output a list of stuff from a model. Now obviously we might want a different category system. So let's just implement a category system utilizing the list view. So we can overwrite some of the query set features and default behaviors by including the query set option. So let's do that utilizing it this way. So we can first of all do it this way. So query set equals books objects all. And now I'm just specifying I only want to show 2. So if I just paginate by 4, so there should be 4 on a page, and go back, I should now only be able to see 2 because I'm only selecting the first 2 from the query that I'm returning from the database. So you can obviously limit the amount of items that are displayed. And obviously you can expand this into a filter if you wanted to, and so on. So we can also alternatively override the class method if we wanted to do this slightly differently. So let's go ahead and do that. So here's an example. We're performing exactly the same operation. So we'll just put that out. So we're performing exactly the same operation, but here we're just overriding the class method in a different manner. So let's now go back into our page and we've refreshed, and you can see exactly the same thing happens. So I'll just put that to 3 so we can just be sure that that is working, and there we go. So let's go back into the URLs. So let's set up this list system. So we're going to build a new URL for this, a new URL pattern. So we're going to create a G for something. For category. I'm not too sure why I call it G. So let's call it C. C for category. And here we're going to take in a string, which is the genre. Okay, that makes sense now. Okay, so we're going to take the genre. So in our model, if you remember, we had genre. So the different categories of these books. So we're going to create a G for genre, and then we're going to take in a string. So we're going to take this string in and then run a query based upon that string. So if the genre is programming, it's then going to show all the items with all the books that have the genre programming, and so on. So we're going to create a new view now called genre view. So let's go back into our views. Okay, so just under our previous class here, we created a new class called genre view. So why would I separate this up? So one of the reasons why you might want to separate this is because potentially they're offering different functionality, and I might want to utilize this somewhere else. I could potentially extend from this and utilize this in another class somewhere. So by breaking these components down further, we can better utilize them potentially later in the program. So here I'm utilizing another list view. You can see again I'm using the model books template, and the contact object name is the same, and I'm paginating by 2. But this time you can see I've override the get query set. So remember I showed you earlier the MRO here, the method flow chart. So that's where we are, and we're trying to override this right here. So let's just go back. So you can see here we've got the filter, and I'm using the iContains to try and find the genre based upon what the user types into the URL. So before we can start, obviously we need to add the genre view right here. So our server begins, and I'm just going to go to the admin and just create a new book. Okay, so I'll create a new book called Vue.js, and slug is just going to be Vue.js, and the genre is Vue. So I'll save that. You notice that all the other books in this list are all genre programming, and they're utilizing a capital letter. So that's important to understand. I'll explain that in a second. So let's go back to our page, which is obviously books / and then G for genre, and then view. So now you can see what's being returned is just the view book. Now, obviously, if I type in programming, then I get all the programming books. Obviously, I'm paginating, so that's why there's only 2 here, and I can go to the next and so on. So it shows all the programming books. So that's really simple to set up utilizing the list view. So just to point out that I'm using here the iContains, because if I were just to include this, for example, so genre equals and then the genre, that's the item that's been typed in. This is case sensitive. So if I typed in program with a lowercase, it wouldn't show me all the programming items or genre items, because in the database, when I type in the genre for a book, I type in programming with a capital letter. So you just need to make sure that you're using iContains so that it then becomes it's not then case sensitive, and will just show all the items based upon the word, avoiding any case sensitivity. Apologies, I got in the loop then of saying the same thing. So now we have that in place, you can see how that works. So at this point, we now have an overview of all the different generic class-based views that Django has to offer to display information. We have template view, the detail view, and now the list view. So these are the general three options that we have. There are a few others that we'll cover later. Those are the general three options that we have specifically for specific tasks that we can utilize in our application. So now in the next tutorial, we'll now focus on inputting data, or looking at some of the generic views where we can input data. Okay, so I apologize if that felt a little bit short and sweet. There's obviously a lot of information here. And like I said, I do want to cover that later on. I am trying to build up knowledge here rather than just give everything all at once. I just feel as though it's nicer in that way, and I want to introduce the right items at the right time to give you better context, because it's okay for me to rabble on for hours about, oh yeah, look at all the different items here in the multiple object mixin, blah, blah, blah. But unless you actually apply it, I guess we're just not going to remember. So I just want to make that a bigger connection in your mind when we're trying to learn these items by trying to give you some more solid examples so you can apply it straight away and have an example, and hopefully you'll remember and better learn in that manner. So thank you very much for listening to this class-based generic view. Hopefully you get an idea of where you'll use this and how easy it is in fact to then create list items, including categories with pagination. So simple.